Hello, my name is Ian Blake and I'm a partner with BPP Consulting. Together with Stantec UK, BPP were responsible for assessing sites that were promoted for mineral working in Essex, and Amber Leversedge in particular from Stantec was responsible for much of the preparation of the report. So the information that I'm presenting to you is set out in detail in this report, and the report includes the details of the assessment process and the assessment findings. The purpose of the mineral site assessment is essentially to consider how well the sites that were promoted during two call for sites processes, how well they align with Essex County Council's planning policy and where such sites should be located. By doing this, we can get a good idea of how well suited the sites are to mineral working or quarrying. As a large number of sites were promoted, it won't be necessary to allocate them all, and so this process will help the council decide which ones are more suited for development than others, and so could potentially be included in the mineral sites plan. Site allocations become areas where, if a planning application is received for their development, there is a greater likelihood that permission will be granted given the location has policy support. And by providing clarity where mineral development would be supported in principle, the allocations in the plan would help enable delivery of essential minerals through the plan-led system. Fundamentally then, we are assessing whether or not a site might be acceptable for development for mineral extraction in principle. What the assessment also does is identify any significant issues that may be associated with developing a particular site. These issues may not affect a site being allocated, but they will be matters that will need to be paid particular attention to as part of any planning application. So as part of the assessment process, we've developed an assessment methodology, and this has been applied consistently to each site. The details of the methodology are set out in the assessment report, and this ensures that the assessment process is transparent in that it can be scrutinised. It's also fair, as all sites are assessed using the same methodology. The assessment is thorough, as it considers all of the main issues which would affect the suitability of a site for development. The assessment has involved experts who are qualified in particular specialisms such as ecology, landscape and transport. So this slide shows an example of what an allocation looks like in an adopted plan. And this is taken from the existing adopted Essex Minerals Local Plan. And you can see specific issues have been identified that would need to be addressed as part of a planning application. This slide shows the distribution of the sites nominated through the call for sites process across Essex. A total of 52 sites were assessed for their suitability, and this includes 4 sites that were allocated in the adopted Minerals Local Plan, which have to date not come forward as applications for development. As you might expect, there is a clustering of the nominated sites, and this reflects the geology, as sites can only be nominated where the sand and gravel resource exists in the ground. I will now go into the distribution of the sites in a bit more detail by considering the sites that were nominated in certain districts and boroughs. So here we can see how different districts and boroughs had different numbers of sites nominated within them. For example, Braintree, 15 sites were assessed within that district. Malden, for example, 8 sites were assessed within that district. The colours that you can see relate to the point at which they were nominated. So the red reference numbers are those sites that were nominated during the first call for sites, and the purple numbers are those that were nominated during the second call for sites. The numbers in blue reference sites that were already adopted in the plan, allocated in the plan, and have been reassessed. One thing to note is that not all districts and boroughs received nominations. So Brentwood, Basildon, Castle Point, Harlow and Rochford received no nominations. So I'm now going to go through each of the districts and boroughs, showing the location of the sites that were nominated and assessed in a bit more detail. So starting off with Braintree, there's two slides. This first one shows some of the sites that were nominated and assessed. As you can see, some of these were located near existing quarries. One site, Kiln Farm, was nominated, but that was subsequently withdrawn by the promoter and so was not assessed. This is a further slide showing nominations within Braintree, and again, some of which are adjacent to existing quarries. Moving on to Chelmsford, 9 sites were nominated originally. One of those was removed by the promoter, withdrawn by the promoter, and this slide shows 7 of the sites that were assessed. And this is the 8th site, that was assessed in Chelmsford. That's Little Smiths at Danbury. Moving on to Colchester, 5 sites were nominated and assessed within Colchester, and this slide shows the location of 4 of them. And you can see that these were fairly proximate to existing quarries. This slide shows the other site nominated and assessed in Colchester, which you can see crosses the Braintree and Maldon boundaries. 3 sites were assessed in Epping Forest, and this first one shows the site nominated and assessed at Patch Park. The other sites in Epping Forest that were assessed are shown on this slide, just touching the Epping Forest boundary. They have a very similar outline, not exactly the same, and so were assessed separately. A total of 8 sites were nominated within the Maldon area. 2 of these sites are shown here, and they are extensions to the existing Ashall Dem quarry. You can see here 2 more sites that were nominated in Maldon. Site A58 is largely in Chelmsford, but does cross into Maldon. So these are the other 4 sites that were nominated in Maldon. You'll see that some of the sites located in Braintree and Colchester, also very close to the boundary, and proximate to the Coleman's Farm quarry. 14 sites were nominated within Tendring. This slide shows 7 of the sites that were assessed. One of the sites, A70, was withdrawn from the nomination from Alan, and so wasn't assessed. Here we can see the other 6 sites that were nominated and assessed within Tendring. Finally, Uttlesford, 7 sites were nominated. Within the area, 1 was withdrawn, and this slide shows 5 of the sites that were assessed. Here you can see the other site in Uttlesford, just crossing the border with Braintree. That's site A96 Rain Quarry, which is a southern extension to the existing Rain Quarry. So moving on to the process of site assessment. process involved consideration of nominated sites against 16 assessment criteria. A methodology was derived for each assessment criteria, which allowed each site to be graded using a red, amber, green grading method. I'll talk a little more about that on a further slide. The methodology for each assessment criteria allowed consistent application of the grades, and information received via the call for sites was checked and queried with site promoters if required. So, for example, in a few cases, clarification over how the site was to be accessed was sought. We prepared maps for each site, which shows their proximity to various geographical features, and these maps supported the assessment process. So these are the assessment criteria that were used to assess the suitability of the sites. There's 16 of them, and they're based on the policies in the adopted Essex Mineral Local Plan. So those policies are used to assess the suitability of sites that come forward for planning applications. So by using these criteria which reflect those policies, we can be fairly sure whether or not a site would be suitable, whether it would be suitable in principle as a site for mineral working and would likely receive planning permission. The criteria range from landscape and visual sensitivity through to airport safeguarding zones, and each of these criteria has been used to assess each of the sites, and ultimately we end up with a RAG score, a red, amber, green score for each site for each of these criteria. So to help us grade sites, assess the sites against the criteria which were set out on the previous slide, we've mapped various geographical features using GIS. We've prepared GIS maps for each site, and this enables us to establish whether or not certain features exist or not, and in turn allows us to assess certain sites. An example of a map that was prepared for a particular site is on the next slide. This slide. So this slide you can see, get an idea of how various features have been mapped. The top left map shows a site in relation to landscape and wildlife designations. Top right in relation to hydrology, so rivers, streams shown. And the bottom left shows historic environment features, including conservation areas and heritage sites. So knowing the existence of certain geographical features, as shown on the GIS maps, forms the basis of the desktop assessment of the sites. The desktop assessments also involve consideration of information provided with previous planning applications, where that was available, or as part of the preparation of the adopted mineral sites plan, and also information held by planning officers. Visits to sites were undertaken to check that conclusions reached by the desktop assessments were robust. So the information collected during the site visits included condition of the sites, topography, how the site sits within the landscape, potential access to the highway, proximity to adjoining land uses, and verification of those adjoining uses. In some cases it wasn't possible to actually go onto the site, so the sites were observed from publicly accessible positions such as public rights of way. Observations were made on the site, and that included the use of photography. And here's some examples of photographs that were taken of sites that were nominated and assessed. So site A67 is a site Church Farm at Tendring, site A79 Crown Quarry, which is north of Wick Lane in Tendring, site A63 is Patch Park A Bridge in Epping Forest. So having gathered the information needed to assess the sites were then assessed using a red, amber, green grading system. And this system is explained on the following slide. So broadly speaking, a site that was graded red meant that the impacts on the particular feature being assessed are likely to be serious. Mitigation to make the site acceptable may be difficult to achieve. And then at the other end of the scale, a green grade was awarded when it was established that there was likely to be no impact requiring mitigation. As I mentioned previously, specialists were employed to assess certain criteria, and detailed reports were prepared to justify the grades. And those reports are included in appendices to the assessment report. So assessment of impacts which could result from other development was also considered. These are known as cumulative impacts. The grades weren't applied in light of the fact that things could change as other development comes forward or is planned or doesn't come forward. But nevertheless, this is a matter that's reported in the report and is something that's assessed in detail at the planning application stage. So the following slides set out the initial findings of the mineral site assessment. They show all of the grades for all of the sites against each criteria. On this slide, you can see all the grades for sites A6 to A68, and on the left-hand column, you'll see each of the criteria. So, for example, if we take A6, which is the first site shown on the left-hand side, landscape visual sensitivity is scored red amber. We've got flooding, graded amber, geoenvironmental, green, air quality green, greenbelt green, service and utility amber, etc., etc. And yes, each of those gradings is shown against each site. This slide shows the gradings for the remaining sites. And it's important to note that these are initial findings. So what we expect is that information will come in when the report is published for consultation, during the consultation, and that may impact the gradings that are ultimately provided for each criteria against each site. So that's the end of my presentation. I hope you found it helpful. I do recommend that you have a look at the report. A lot of the detail obviously is in that report, and that hopefully this presentation has helped you find your way around the process. Thank you.